right. Jellila will be a session chair for this meeting, so I will pass the word to her, and we'll start.
Hi, my name is Jellila. I'm the chair. Thank you for organizing all this beautiful conference, Alexandra and the whole MIND team. We'll just, before we start, we'll just go over some brief housekeeping rules. And I would like to let you know that we have enabled closed captioning, allowing the transcription, and this meeting will be recorded, and we'll stop the recording during the Q&A sessions. We also like to remind you that we provided a trigger warning as some sensitive subjects will be discussed. Another reminder that we are not healthcare professionals, or we do not provide therapy. That you can visit our website at mindsinacademia.com.resources to refer to some of our collected resources. In any case, if someone tries to hack the Zoom session, we will either remove the responsible party from the meeting or end the meeting. In a later case, just check your email for the instructions. Lastly, we just wanted to thank all the speakers for being able to join us. If you have any questions, feel free to send us an email to mind.conference@gmail.com. I will now hand over to Linda, who is going to be the moderator.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our panel. I will okay. Welcome everyone to our panel, and we have three amazing panelists here with us, Dr. Andrew Timming, Dr. Isabel Torres, and Dr. Stefano Zucca. Would you, I guess you can do a better job of introducing yourselves than I can. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourselves? Why don't we start with Dr. Timming?
Thanks, Linda. How long should I have my introduction? Is this just a real short one, or should I go straight into the material?
Let's just do a short introduction first.
Okay, yeah. So happy to meet you all. My name is Andrew Timming. I'm a professor of human resource management at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology here in Melbourne, Australia. You can probably tell from my accent that I am not Australian. I'm originally from the Midwest in the United States. I'm from a state called Minnesota, which is right on the border with Canada. In fact, in certain circles, I may even claim that I'm Canadian, even though I'm not. I guess I'm pleased to be here to speak to you about mental health in academia. I've been active in this space for a long time. I've suffered from mental health problems for about 20 years now. Mental health has been, a big problem in my family. I lost my mom to suicide. She had borderline personality disorder, and ever since then, I've just committed to being completely open and honest and transparent about talking about mental health, because I think it's so important to obliterate the stigma attached to it. I guess I'll pass it on to the next person to introduce themselves. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dr. Torres, would you like to go next?
Isabel, you're
muted.
Is that okay now?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's lovely to be here. So I'm a science editor, writer, communicator, and based in France, although I'm not French. And I'm co-founder and CEO of Mothers in Science, which is a nonprofit that raises awareness of the challenges faced by mothers in the STEM sector. And we advocate for workplace equity and inclusion. So I'm Portuguese. I grew up in Portugal. I have a PhD in genetics from the University of Cambridge. So I lived 12 years in the UK, where I did pretty much most of my academic career. So I did master's, PhD, postdoc, typical path. Then I moved to France to follow my then husband, now ex-husband. I have 4 children. And when I moved to France, I changed careers. And I started doing science editing and communication. And this is where I am now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Dr. Silke, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. And can you hear me well? Okay, that's perfect. So thanks a lot for inviting me here. I'm really happy and excited to have the opportunity to discuss with all of you. So I'm a neuroscientist. I am still I'm working in academia, and I'm doing a postdoc at the University of Turin in Italy. So I did a PhD in neuroscience in Italy in another city. It was in Genova, and there, after getting my PhD there, I decided to move, and I went to the UK. And so I worked for 3 years in London. I did my a postdoc always in neuroscience, and in London I had the opportunity to actually discover this world of mental health, and in particular to get more involved in mental health and in academia. And I worked with some of the people there at UCL, and in particular from the HR and well-being team, to develop some ways of improving the way people can be supported at the university. And then I moved back to Italy to kind of be closer to my family, and now I'm there and still not sure what is gonna happen next, but I'm fine. So thanks a lot. That's it.
Thank you. So thank you so much all for joining us today. This is a panel that is focusing on people, but I guess before we get to your own stories, just a general question, and it's maybe a difficult question, maybe not so difficult depending on your perspective, but why do you think academics suffer mental health challenges more than the general population? Your own personal opinion, experiences.
I'm happy to start with that one. Our successes and failures are for everyone to see. If you want to know whether someone's been successful in academia, you simply look at their webpage. All of our publications are listed out there for everyone to see. There's no real way to hide it. And with that level of transparency, coupled with the increasing expectations year on year in terms of what people have to produce, where they have to publish and how much money they have to bring in, it's a perfect storm for mental illness. That's my own personal view.
I can go next.
Yes. Okay.
I think it's more about the system. In my personal opinion, because pressure for success exists in every sector. The academic system is based on not personal performance, but basically your measure for success relies on other people's, recommendation letters. There's a lot of nepotism. There's no real official evaluation system, and there's a lot of bullying. There's widespread bullying, widespread discrimination, and because academics live in their ivory tower, there's a lot of silence, a lot of colluding with everything that is going on. And because there's no accountability, students, postdocs, everyone that is lower in the hierarchy, just has no way of protecting themselves. There's no system to make these people and these behaviors accountable. We all know we cannot rely on HR. There's no committee, and everything depends on funding. So we are all grabbed by the funding system. Any PI or head of department who brings in money will be protected in this very elitistic game. So maybe this is a bit strong to start with, but I think we have to put the truth out there. And I've seen so many talented, brilliant people be mentally destroyed during their academic journey, just because of the system, because they were bullied, because they were underappreciated, because performance is not enough. Even for myself, I didn't publish my main PhD paper just because my boss didn't bother to write it. And that's 4 to 5 years of work. And I've seen many other people going through the same. And, I think all of this at some point, if you're underappreciated, underpaid, obviously will affect mental health. So it's this whole system of not having accountability. People are not accountable. Anything is permitted, and we don't have a way of protecting ourselves. In addition to the performance, that you're right, that all our failures, let's say, and successes are are measured in this way, publications, which is not fair, because there's a lot of work that doesn't end up in a publication that is not seen.
Absolutely. It's hard to pick one, but there's so many different different issues. Dr. Zuka, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing more, which I think, everyone is right. And but I think one of the issues that I found quite important is the thing that the whole career is focused on yourself. So you have to do your PhD, you have to apply for your own fundings, you have to build your own career. And that, also when you publish, that what is important, your first name. Yeah, so if you do collaborations, and sometimes the whole team that is contributing with you doesn't get the benefit that you get to have your first author publication. So everything is focused on yourself, and that pushes people to feel more isolated. And so I've seen for many of my colleagues that sometimes this sort of I'm on my own and I have to work for myself. It kind of drag them down in this sort of bubble where they are alone and they don't feel comfortable in actually asking for support and help, or just chatting with the other colleagues, just because they don't want to show that they are not they're struggling, or they're not able to manage either the stress or the situation.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a really important point, which maybe we can open up to other people for review if they feel comfortable, in that a lot of people can see a PhD or any sort of research work at every level as very isolating. And you are working on an individual project most of the time. You, depending on where you're based, depending on your supervisor, depending on your lab itself, you may be working with a lot of people. There may be collaboration, or there may be this focus of hyper competition where everyone feels like they have to work on themselves. And then when you move into postdoc, there's even less people around. Then you're moving into faculty. Some departments can be full of this individualism and you need to do it yourself. Have you come across this in your work, and how did you deal with it? Or have you been lucky, I guess, to find a welcoming department full of collaboration?
For me, the key of like not surviving, but like finding a way to deal with everything is basically to promote collaborations instead of like working alone. That doesn't always help in terms of like applying for grants and also like finding like your main project. But I try to, and especially now that I moved back to Italy, one of the reasons why I decided to move back is because there's in the department where I'm now, there's more like a culture of collaborating and try to build things together. And that's not just related to work, but also like when I was struggling with some stress, I found like just chatting with people that was enough for me to like reduce the level or the impact that some situation was having on me.
Absolutely. I guess in the essence of time, this goes faster than you think it does. Would you like to talk about your own mental health journeys through your different career stages, or maybe talk about something that is important that you would like to highlight about your career journey or mental health during it, and why? I know you mentioned, you touched on it before, why you got interested, but how you dealt with mental health in academia.
I can start. Even though I didn't really have many problems myself, I think I'm quite a resilient person, or I was just lucky to be in supportive environments. But I have seen people struggling with mental health throughout my career. I agree, there's a lot of isolation. And I was in supportive environments, let's say, very friendly labs. But there's also, you know, this bullying problem. I think it's really, now we start talking about it. At the time, we didn't speak about it at all. It was just accepted, you know, it was just accepted that your PI will treat you like that. And the problem is a lot of the things are very subtle in my experience. You know, it's a lot of the challenges mostly women go through, and particularly mothers. You know, women have to work 10 times more to prove themselves. Their work is invisible. And when you become a mother, yeah, people just see you as less competent, not available, and you don't know you're going, it's very subtle bias. So I didn't know I was going through that. All of the women I speak with, they don't know when they are going through these problems. And what helped at the time, so basically things like I would give an idea in a lab meeting and it would be dismissed by the supervisor, and then a man 10 minutes later would say the same idea, and oh, what a great idea. You know, things like this happen a lot to women. And obviously this affects your self-confidence. So this is what I suffered the most, was a big drop in self-confidence, especially after having my children. And, you know, all of a sudden you're in the top tier of people, and all of a sudden people just put you just feel like you become just, yeah, people no longer believe you can make it, basically. And this has affected my self-confidence. And what helped me was speaking to someone more senior in the lab, who told me, oh, actually, you're not the only person going through that. Many people before you have been through this lab, arriving very confident, very ambitious, and they just drop out of academia altogether. And, you know, the people I saw struggling with mental health, they were really very isolated. There's still, well, at the time more, but there was still a lot of stigma. People are embarrassed. Few resources, you don't know who you should go to, you're afraid of admitting it because people will think you're less competent and they just will push you out, which would make things worse. So this is what I witnessed: a lot of isolation, a lot of stigma, nobody talking about it. And this is for sure what helps, is to know that you're not the only one, and that is just normal to struggle, especially if you're in a toxic environment, which happens so often in academia.
Absolutely. I think, Dr. Tuning, you were unmuting at one stage.
Yes, I'm happy to speak to my own personal experience. There's no shortage of early career researchers who are willing to speak up about mental health issues, and I think that that's great. There's a blog that a couple of my friends have started called Voices in Academia, where people can actually either anonymously or with their name talk openly about the mental health struggles that they've faced. And I think it's great that there are a lot of early career researchers willing to talk about these issues. What I have noticed is that there are very, very few full professors like myself who are willing to talk about these things. And I don't know if full professors keep their struggles to themselves, or if very few people who have mental illnesses make full professor. And I think it may be the latter. I mean, what Isabel has said is absolutely right. Academia is almost inherently toxic from different points of view. There are some lovely parts to it. There are some lovely colleagues, but it requires a level of resilience that's out of reach for most people with mental illnesses. You know, speaking from my own experience, as I said before, I've suffered from mental illness since I was maybe about my master's degree is when I first started having symptoms. And from my master's degree all the way through now as a full professor, I've struggled with obsessive compulsive disorder, health anxiety, which started as physical health anxiety and transitioned to mental health anxiety. And I don't feel the need to go specifically into the type of symptoms that I've faced. But what I can say is that there have been at least 4 periods over my academic career where I was essentially incapacitated, meaning I was just unable to work. It's difficult to expect someone with a mental illness to have the kind of resilience that you need to be successful in academia. And I mean, I guess the best advice I can give is maybe reflected in a bit of what Isabel just said about the importance of having senior people in the field that you can turn to for advice. I was extremely fortunate. I, like Isabel, got my PhD from Cambridge. My first lecturing job was at the University of Manchester. And I was extremely fortunate to have a set of mentors who really took me under their wing. And, there are the formal policies that a university will say, this is what you need to do to get promotion. And then there's the real things you have to do to get promotion. The real things you have to do to get promotion are not in the formal policies. You won't find those written down anywhere. You get that information through having a good network of senior mentors. And I had just tremendous support as an early career researcher. And without that kind of support, I have no doubt I would have been left in the wayside at various points throughout my career. And another thing maybe I should say is that it is nonsensical to talk about mental illness as though it's one sort of homogeneous lump. Everyone has different symptoms. My own symptoms tend to be rumination and obsessive thoughts that are difficult to, if not impossible, to expel from one's head. And by some kind of ironic, strange twist, from a certain point of view, my mental illness may have actually helped me during my career. And I'll tell you how. It's when I get obsessive thoughts, really the only thing that can break those is an extreme, intense direction of my thoughts. And when I write, it's one of the ways I can help distract myself from myself, if that makes any sense. Not everyone will have that same opportunity because different mental illnesses have different symptoms, some of which may be more or less of an impediment to your productivity. But for me, the fact that I've been able to write over the past decade that I've been in academia has been a godsend. As I said, there have been periods, at least 4 of them, where I've not even been able to do that because the symptoms have gotten so bad. But when you can manage them from a strange, really ironic point of view, your mental illness can help you sort of divert those obsessions to more productive activities, which can ironically actually help your productivity in academia. But just not to take up too much time, I guess before I pass it on to Stefano, I would say, going back to what I said before, academia is toxic. It can be very toxic, and there are no safe spaces, regardless of what people try and do and the initiatives that they try and implement. It's good to have support, but the truth is, it is a brutal world. And as much as it would be great to change academia from a systemic point of view, we are not in a position to be able to change it in a way that will accommodate us. That's the bottom line. And from that point of view, I guess the best advice I can give is build your individual resilience as best you can, and do that in conjunction with seeking out mentors who understand you and are able to provide you with a clear path beyond what's written in the formal documentation and how to be a successful academic, because that formal documentation is not what it really takes. You have to actually have someone from the inside who's been there to help you along that path. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Zucker, would you like to go?
Yes, sure. Well, it's so amazing to hear these stories. It's also, I feel like it's super important to hear them, because that kind of what I realized from my small experience is that more you hear stories and more you understand you're not alone, and there's like people that you can reach out to. And that was basically more or less what happened, I think a couple of years ago. So I haven't directly suffered of like specific mental health conditions, and but at some point in my career I was going through quite a lot of stress and like this feeling of not knowing what I should have done to go on with like the career path that is considered to be the standard one. And so at some point I was starting looking for different options, and there was a key moment where that I'm super happy to had the opportunity to do. There was like in our department we usually had like journal clubs, and I was trying to find out whether they were like all scientific journal clubs, so like research articles, and I was trying to find out something that was interesting for everyone. And I came across an article publishing some data about anxiety and depression among PhD students. And I realized that actually that is a topic that I've seen so many times all around me, but I never had the chance to chat with in front of like everyone, with both PhD students, postdocs, and also PIs, and so professors and so on. And so I took that opportunity and I did like a journal club on this article. And I found like the effect that it had on many people, it was so strong. So like people were starting sharing different thoughts that at some point they were mainly confusing, but just because like there was this need of trying to speak more and more about this and share more. And I was probably lucky also to find a strong support from the people in the department at UCL that were actually happy to set like time and a moment to chat more about this. And that kind of started my journey related to like mental health, because I met during the same period, I met like one of my friends in Cambridge. So I was actually living in Cambridge because my husband was working there. So I was doing this bit of commuting, not a good choice, but it was fine. But I had the opportunity to meet one of my friends that was working in the University of Cambridge, and she was starting this group, the support group that was based on coaching skills. And so I thought there was a good opportunity to try to implement something similar also at UCL. And the reason why I thought that was important is that when we were discussing about support from UCL, actually the University College London provides different services, but not many people know they exist, and they mainly focus either on students, so like undergrad students, or like admin part. And so there were this kind of not cover area, which were like PhD students and postdocs especially, that is not that they need the special attention, but when you go and you hear like the thing that people at the counseling services, they tell you, they were all related, for example, to the anxiety of not passing the exam. And that was creating some sort of barrier that prevented them to maybe go for like this kind of services. And the other thing is that probably you get all the information about services in place at the beginning when you start, and you get them together with hundreds of other services that the university provides. And so the issue is that when you need them, you may not fully remember that they actually exist. And so for that reason, we thought that maybe having something that was more linked to the people inside the lab or inside the departments, and that was managed with the people of the department, that would have helped a bit more to let people seek for help if they need. And so like just briefly, what we set up is basically like a group, and like it's a system that can start from really few people. Like 2 or 3 people is enough to start like a group. And the idea is to provide that the university provides us a training, an initial training on how to use simple coaching skills, which is mainly like active listening. And so we use like the CRO model, but the idea is just to ask questions to help people like feel free to share their experiences. And then we get this training, and then the idea is that the group is self-sustained. So basically, like everyone gets the opportunity to support each other, and we try to stick with what was more like work related, to also to be aware that we are not therapists, that we cannot provide any professional support, but we can share examples on what happens in our working life and in some situations that were actually useful for different people. And just finally, we started this in February 2020. So like 1 month after we had like all the lockdowns, and then we moved it virtual. And so we had the opportunity to test it in remote, and it worked really well, especially because it was a way like twice a month to check if each other were fine. And it ran for like a couple of years, and now we're trying to expand it more to other departments. It requires a bit of commitment, of course, but for me at least, it was a great experience to get some training and to help other people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you everyone for sharing your stories. We did get a question in the chat about mentorship specifically, and I know that was Dr. Timming that was speaking about it, so maybe you can answer this, and maybe we can also get other people's perspectives on mentorship and support. And it says, do you recommend building networks specifically in your institute that you are in, or in a different institute, and how can you go about finding supportive networks?
Both. You will need mentors both within your own department, but importantly, I would say beyond your department as well, because things can go south pretty quickly even within a department. Even with your own supervisor, who can be a mentor, things can go south pretty quickly. So it's important to seek out support externally, out with your department, but also even out with your university as well. Some of you will be fortunate to be a part of departments that have formal mentoring arrangements put in place. That was one of the first things that I did when I started my job at RMIT. I was head of department, and I implemented a formal mentoring program where everyone who wanted a mentor was given a mentor. And if we couldn't find a mentor within our department or even within our university, then we went to other universities to seek out those mentors on behalf of those people. We had to have 2 Indigenous pre-doctoral fellows in our department. Obviously, they would feel more comfortable with Indigenous supervisors. We weren't able to accommodate that within our department. And so I reached out to some Indigenous professors that I knew at my old university, at University of Western Australia, and connected them with each other. I know it's difficult as an early career researcher, and maybe this builds into what Isabel said about the lack of confidence. I know it's difficult to reach out to senior professors and introduce yourself and establish those relationships, but they're not going to reach out to you because they don't know what you're going through. It's not likely that they would reach out to you. Maybe a few would. If you feel like you need support, you're going to have to take the initiative to stick out your hand and say hello, reach out. Probably the best thing to do, I'm just thinking back to when I was a PhD student, the best thing to do is to talk to other PhD students and do a little research in terms of, what senior professors are like, because not all of them are little angels. Some, in fact, are the exact opposite. And it's good to get a feel for what their reputations are by contacting PhD students in that department, because PhD students know, man, they know, they know who the bad ones are, they know who the good ones are, and they're usually happy to share that information with people. So do a little background information, but you're going to have to reach out, you're going to have to make contact. And if they don't write back to you, if they ignore you, there's some, social rejection, that's actually good, because you don't want those people for mentors anyway. It's actually doing you a favor by not writing you back, and you will get ignored. That's just the nature of academia. There are people who are too cool or too busy to respond to PhD students or undergraduate students or whatever. But the ones who do write back to you, those are the ones you want to connect with anyway. But as I said, they're not going to seek you out. You have to seek them out.
Great, thank you so much. I guess, does anyone else have any opinions on mentoring, finding mentors, or even just finding support networks? Maybe not necessarily mentors. I know you already spoke a bit about it, Dr. Zaka, but if you want to talk about your perspective of support in any respect.
Yeah, so what I found just chatting with my colleagues is sometimes support cannot come just from one source. So it's often important to find the best support that's best fits your needs. And so I think something that Andrew was saying is that there are some not really we say angel professors or angel mentors, but I was actually surprised to find many were actually interested in supporting you and providing you advice and mentoring. And so I feel sometimes there's a bit of barriers also between PhD students and postdocs and faculty members, as it's a barrier that prevents people for asking for support to them or for mentoring, because they think that they may not get a positive outcome out of that. But actually, there are several faculty members and professors who are actually really happy, at least from my small experience, to support you. And so I think it's good to try to reach them out. And And yes, probably he really said like the worst thing that can happen is like no, and you don't want really to connect with them. So, but there are like I've seen really amazing mentors, and they're not probably they're not many, but when they found them out, and it's key. And also for PhD students, I found quite useful to find also good support for on their postdocs. So like having this sort of like different stages in their career interacting together, it's what I found quite useful because you can get more perspective from different point of view.
Absolutely, thank you. Dr. Torres, would you like to share? It's completely up to you. You don't have to.
Yeah, I can share my experience because I was really bad at networking when I was in academia. I'm still not. No, I've improved, but it's just my personality. I'm very independent and wanting to do things on my own. And I think the academic environment promotes that. You know, we've spoken about that. And I'm just very shy. It's just my character. So I really struggled when I was a student, even as a postdoc, to reach out to people. And my supervisors were encouraging me to, you know, go speak to the head of the department, go speak to this person. And I was like, I don't need, I can just find the answer by myself. I was very, very resistant to look for help and network. And the way I overcame that was thinking that I'm not asking for help, because it's really an exchange. You know, mentors also benefit from a mentoring relationship. It's very gratifying for them, and it's networking for them as well. You don't know, you might become a big shot one day, you never know. So this helped me network a bit more, you know, thinking that is a reciprocal relationship, and you know, and not thinking about it as in asking for help. It's just going and having a chat. You know, you just reach out to someone you find is interesting and could give you positive, you know, feedback about your work, and just go talk to this person and talk about your work and your plans, and you get to know each other, and the relationship can start like that. But yeah, it's important to know who you approach, by asking around. Very good advice were given here, and just do it. And talking to colleagues, other students, that's important for mental health and struggles. It's always very reassuring to know that we're not alone and other people are facing the same problems, because that removes that blame, that self-blame, that I think it's very consuming, that you blame. If you're isolated, you blame yourself, you think you're the problem, there's something wrong with me, and then your confidence goes down the drain. So really, by talking to people, you realize everyone is like you. There's no real genius. Most people make it through connections and hard work. There's very, very few geniuses out there, so anyone can make it. And definitely networking and mentoring are key in any job, but in academia in particular. So yeah, just approach it as I'm just going to chat to this person about my work. That's all.
Awesome. I guess it's kind of on the same theme, but we did get a question about do you have any recommendations on how people can learn to accept mental health support when they've grown up learning that, you know, you should be doing it yourself, that you can make it as long as you push yourself, work hard and get through it, but that's sort of a lot of pressure to put on yourself, and it kind of links in a little bit into what you were saying, Dr. Torres, about being resistant to ask people. And I know you were saying it was shyness as well, but it can be, when you've grown up being independent, it can be very hard to accept that support. So does anyone have any recommendations on asking, on learning to accept?
Yeah, maybe I can start. I think it's about, I see it as you know, it's like any other illness. You know, if you have a headache, you take a paracetamol. And, you know, I still see a lot of stigma for mental health. It depends on where you are, but you say in academia, we talk a lot about it now, but elsewhere we don't. If you say I'm taking antidepressants or I'm going to therapy, here in France, it's still quite taboo. And the way I tell people is, you know, if you have a disease, you take medicine, you know, you're not going to, you know, sort it out by yourself, or just, and you know, searching for support is that you're just finding a way of healing yourself and dealing with it. So there's no point resisting it and feeling ashamed, because, you know, mental health is also physical health in a way. It's our brain chemistry. And you might need medicine or not, but, you know, therapy is like a medicine. And yeah, you're not well, you have to deal with it. That's how I see it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Does anyone else have any advice?
If you have a choice in terms of whether or not to accept help, you're in pretty good shape, because that means that you're coping well enough to have that choice. At least I can say in my own experience, it was not a choice. It was something that I had to do. By definition, I wasn't able to do it on my own. So if your mind or your body gets to a bad enough state, you will turn to help, I hope. I mean, that's the big hope there, isn't it? Some people choose not to seek help at that stage, but for most people, when things get bad enough, you will put your pride to the side and your sense of self-reliance, and you'll realize that this is a question of survival. At least I can say that was the case in my situation.
If I can just add one thing, well, I think that everything has been already said, but sometimes it seems that like I've heard this so many times, like research is stressful and you have to deal with it. And if you're not able to cope with all the ongoing stress, then maybe that's not the field, or you should drop. And I've heard this from like faculties, but also from postdocs and other people. And I think this is it has like two effects. One is to make people feel really, really isolated when they are not able to cope with the stress, and so that might prevent them to actually say it out loud and ask for help, even if it's not like if they're not requiring like more professional support, but just a way to reduce their stress. And so that's for me, like this idea that if you like to be a good scientist, you really have to like suffer and support all the stress. That's just wrong, and it's not how it should be, at least for me. Like, because at the end, if you are able, or if you reach a point where you need more professional support, or if you understand that you need some support, that doesn't really affect the scientist that you are, because the scientist, so the way you do science is actually independent on like your skills in being like a good scientist are not related on the fact that you may need or may not need any support for like your mental health. They shouldn't be connected, at least for me.
Thank you. I think for the last 7 minutes that we have now, we are going to stop the recording. So if people want to ask questions, they can without being recorded. So